What's happening? This is Pastor Nate from the Refuge Student Ministry, and this week we dove into the first week in our series called Stretched. We're talking about spiritual habits and how important that is in our life as somebody that follows Jesus and what that means. When you talk about being flexible and you talk about stretching and you talk about your muscles, oftentimes you think of sports and you think of working out and you think of exercising. And the truth is that we're all flexible in different ways. Some more flexible than others, but the majority of the time, people that are more flexible because they chose to stretch. They chose to exercise those muscles in certain ways. And the truth is anybody can really become more flexible over time as they stretch and exercise the muscles that they've been given. Because we all as human beings have the same muscles. We all have the same muscles and the same ability to be flexible at some point, depending on how we stretch and how we exercise. Now, stretching and exercising those muscles can be uncomfortable, it can be painful at times, and it takes work. But that is how you get the results of being more flexible and being stronger and being more athletic with the same muscles that everybody else has. But what does this have to do with us in our walk with Jesus? If I was to ask the question, if your faith was a muscle, how flexible would it be? Would you be able to touch your toes? Would you be able to touch the floor? Or could you maybe just touch your knees? Or maybe you couldn't even stretch or bend at all. What would your faith really be like? And the truth is for us to have a faith that is strong and is healthy and is flexible and can carry us and sustain us, through different things that happen to us in life, it has to be something that is stretched and that is exercised in order for it to grow and to be healthy. But what does it look like for you to stretch your faith? That's what we're going to dive into this month and what that means. And the first thing we're going to talk about right here and right now is how we can stretch our faith through a commitment and what that looks like. I think we've all had those things in our life that we said we are going to start this habit, or we're going to start this thing, or we're going to dive headfirst into this sport or this hobby, and it didn't work out. For adults, a lot of times that's dieting or that's exercise. For students, it can be a sport, it can be to get better grades, it can be to make money or save money, or whatever that might look like. But a lot of times we fail at those things. And we fail because we had a lack of commitment to whatever habit we were trying to build or whatever thing we were trying to do over a process of time. Many of us treat our faith the same way. We want our faith to grow and we want our faith to be stronger. We want it to be something that's healthy, but we fail to commit to the healthy habits that will make that happen. Just like if you want your body to be healthy, you have to eat healthy regularly and you have to exercise. One good meal does not automatically make you a healthy person. Just like going out and running a mile one day out of the year does not mean that you're going to be healthy and you're going to be ready to run a marathon. It's something that takes a commitment and takes time, and it's a habit that you have to build. One of the places that we can learn about how to stretch our faith in the Bible is through a guy named Paul. Paul wrote a lot of the New Testament. He wrote a lot of letters to churches and to believers about what it really means to follow Jesus. One of these churches and one of these places was in Rome, and he wrote the book of Romans, one of his longest books, one of his longest letters. He wrote to this church in Rome, and his whole purpose and his whole goal behind the majority of this letter was to explain to them that salvation could ultimately be found in Jesus, and our way to have a relationship with God is ultimately through Him and through Him alone. Paul explains some of this to them in Romans chapter 5 in verse 6. He says, "For while we were still helpless, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For rarely will someone die for a just person, though for a good person perhaps someone might even dare die. But God proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Paul's explaining to them that God ultimately showed his love for us by Jesus dying for us while we were at our lowest and at our worst. He says, you know what? He said it'd be really rare for somebody to give their life for a really good person. But he says Jesus gave his life for us while we were sinners and while we were at our worst. While we had this vandalism and this thing that erodes our relationships and erodes everything good around us. This thing called sin and wrongdoing that we do against God. Paul wanted them to understand that Jesus was the way to God. And that was the way to this salvation and this redemption. And it could be found in Jesus. But it wasn't just about this eternity to be lived. He wanted them to understand how Jesus can ultimately, completely, and radically transform their life and transform the value systems within their life. And how important that was that we ultimately live as Jesus followers right here and right now. And that's why he goes on further in the very next chapter to explain a little bit about what this means. He says in chapter 6, he says, "What should we say then? Should we continue in sin that grace may multiply?" He says, since we've been forgiven and we've been made right with God, should we just continue to sin and continue to do wrong so that God's grace may continue to multiply and continue to cover that over and to continue to forgive us of that? He says, absolutely not. He says, no, that's not how your life as a Jesus follower should look. It should look different. He continues and he says, how can we who died to sin still live in it? Or are you unaware that all of us who were baptized into Jesus Christ were baptized into his death? Therefore, we were buried with him by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too may walk in newness of life. Paul is talking about a drastic change that takes place within the life of somebody that chooses and commits to follow Jesus. Somebody that chooses to commit and they say, I'm going to identify with Jesus. Now, what does this mean? A lot of times, people, especially in America, they grow up in church and they kind of fall into this category of they know who God is and they know who Jesus is, and they just kind of know it, and they almost fall into this kind of weird relationship with God. But there's a lack of commitment. Just like if me and my wife dated, and there was a point in time in our relationship when we chose to make a drastic, life-changing commitment to each other. Did that mean that we were not in love and in a relationship before that? No. We still loved each other and we still had this relationship, but there was not this commitment to each other for the rest of our life until a moment in time. And in that moment in time, everything changed. Your relationship with God through Jesus is the same way. You may know who God is, you may know who Jesus is, you may know what he's done. But there comes a point in time in your life when you choose to make a commitment to say, yes, I believe Jesus is who he says he is and did what he said he did, and understand what that affects in my own life. It's going to radically change my life. From this point forward, I'm going to choose to identify with Jesus in this new life that I now live. I'm going to choose to do this and to testify this to everybody that I know in this way of baptism in front of a bunch of people, that's saying, man, I choose to identify with Jesus and I'm making a commitment to Jesus in this relationship. I'm choosing to, by faith, believe Jesus is who he said he is and did what he said he did, and what that means for me, and as I now follow him as Lord. And that's what Paul is trying to convey to the church in Rome, is how important and significant this is for your faith. As you go throughout the Bible, you'll see a lot of different stories of people making a commitment to follow Jesus. Two really important people that made this commitment was Peter and Andrew. Now this story takes place in the book of Luke chapter 4 as Jesus finds Peter and Andrew and he asks them, and he says, hey, why don't you put down your nets? Why don't you come and why don't you follow me? And I'll make you fishers for people. And what Jesus is talking about is he's also ultimately talking about, I'm going to make you disciple makers. But follow me. And Peter and Andrew, they choose to put down their nets and walk away from that old life to something new and something different with a different value system. A completely, radically different life as they choose to follow Jesus by faith, believing that, man, Jesus says he's the Messiah, and I believe that, so now I'm going to follow him, and my life is going to look completely different. And that was a commitment for them that stretched their faith in Jesus. Another person in the Bible is Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was somebody that had a radical transforming moment with Jesus, and she believed that Jesus was the Messiah and he was the person that they have been talking about for thousands of years. It was going to come, redeem mankind, and reconcile them with God. She believed that even after Jesus' death on the cross. Jesus died and she continued to be committed to Jesus, still believing that he was who he said he was. And she was right. She was one of the first people to see Jesus after he had died and was resurrected. She had a commitment to Jesus, understanding that, yes, I believe Jesus is who he said he was. And you can look down all through the Bible and see different people that had a commitment, and their faith was stretched through this commitment to Jesus. So what does this mean for our life right now? The truth is, we're all in different spots right this second spiritually. Just how we're all flexible in different ways, and some of us can touch our toes, some of us can touch the ground, some of us, we struggle to even get close to that. We're all in different areas spiritually with our faith. So I'm going to challenge you to make a commitment this week in a couple different areas. I challenge you to, maybe you need to make a commitment to show up or to watch the teaching video next week. Maybe that's all the further your commitment goes. Man, I don't really know where I'm at, but I'm going to show up next week, next Sunday night, or I'm going to show up and watch this video next week and see where this takes me. Maybe you need to make a commitment to say, you know what, I know who God is and I know who Jesus is, but I've always been scared to make this commitment to follow Jesus because I'm nervous about what Jesus is going to do with my life. Maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you need to make a commitment to follow Jesus. Maybe you need to make a commitment to love God. Maybe you say, yeah, I follow Jesus, but I really struggle with this idea to love God. Or maybe I need to love him more, and I need to know more about him so that I can love him more. Maybe you need to make a commitment to say, I need to love people. This is one that I think we can all commit to say, I need to love people more. And the truth is, the more that you love God, the more that you have a proper understanding of God and who he is and your love for him, the better that you can truly be a reflection of God's love to the people that you encounter throughout your day and throughout your week. Maybe you're completely new to this entire idea and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. Maybe you need to make a commitment to say, I am going to ask some questions and I'm going to see what God has in store for me and what all of this means. But no matter what your commitment is this week, I ask that you commit to stretching your faith in one of these ways. This is the first step to you building new spiritual habits in your own life to help you grow and stretch your faith in a powerful way. So I encourage you to join us next week, whether in person on Sunday night here at the church, or you join us online in our next video that comes out next week. Either way, I encourage you to make a commitment to join us next week. And I will see you in the